Tonight, we're going to get lost in the turbulent legend of two bakers, the jazz legend Chet Baker and the rock legend Ginger Baker. Join us on the Film Swap Podcast.
Here is a motion picture film.
Tinsel and spun candy and thrill.
Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and I'd like to introduce you to my esteemed co-host. He's a man who's been suffering with extreme dependency for years, but the dependency is for cucumber sandwiches. He's the ecstatic gaucho himself. He's Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm very well, David. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm all right. I'm getting, into the hard stuff tonight. I got a lovely cup of lemon and ginger tea to get into the spirit of our two subjects tonight, because we're talking about two music legends, absolute towering figures of popular music in the 20th century. But we're looking at documentaries that capture them at the end of their careers and their life, in one case anyway, documenting their quite turbulent and troubled lifestyles and history. And they're both really fascinating films and really fascinating subjects. Jonathan, do you want to just very briefly give us a little preview of our second film tonight, which is called Beware, Mr. Baker?
Yes, our second film is Beware, Mr. Baker, which came out 2012, directed by Jay Bulger. And it's a documentary about Ginger Baker, the jazz and rock drummer. It's a terrific film. And the first film, can I talk about that? The first film came out in 1988. And that is Let's Get Lost. And this one's directed by Bruce Weber, who's better known as a fashion photographer, I believe. It's all about Chet Baker, the jazz trumpeter and singer, I have to say. I mean, he is a jazz trumpeter, but he's got an amazing voice. And I'm not sure. I think both talents are pretty strong. And both of them, the films came out sort of towards the end of their lives, I guess. Very much near the end of Chet Baker's life. And two terrific films about two sort of jazz bakers, basically.
So Let's Get Lost is just a really fascinating film. And I must admit, I'd never seen it before. And covering these two films tonight about the Bakers was really your idea, Jonathan. You kind of proposed this as a subject matter, and I think it's really interesting how these two films, although they have a lot of differences, as in the personalities as well of the two figures that we're talking about. The films also, the two of them had quite similar kind of lifestyles and sort of career declines. And both films kind of capture them both at the kind of late stage at a period in their life when things were maybe slightly on the up from a very slow, steady decline. But it's quite struck me just how much, aside from their surname, how many similarities there are between these two personalities and between their stories and these films. It'd be quite interesting to sort of get into a little bit of that. So as we're talking about Chet Baker first, because for years, I wouldn't, I listen to a lot of jazz music, and so I'm quite familiar with Chet Baker, but I wouldn't necessarily say I'm like a super fan or anything. I have a few of his albums, and a lot of recordings that he's
Yes.
on various bits and pieces. And so I've listened to him for years, and I absolutely love his voice. He's just got this incredible, beautiful voice,
Yeah.
and his trumpet playing also is amazing, and it's just this incredible style. But I
Mm.
must admit, because as I said, I've never really sort of dug really deeply
Yep.
into his catalog of music, and I'm just sort of more familiar with him at a high level, sort of as a more casual listener.
Yep.
I didn't really know much about him at all. I didn't really know much about his life
Yep.
or his career. But I just always enjoyed listening to him when he was on.
Yes.
How about yourself? Were you very familiar with Chet Baker?
Well, I would say not particularly, but whenever his music gets played on the radio, I think, great Chet Baker, and I think I have I mean, occasionally I put on an album as well, and so yeah, I love that. Well, both his piano, not piano, his trumpet, and his voice is just so eerie, almost so
Mm.
frail and incredibly beautiful, and the way
Kind of haunting as well. Just sort of
haunting,
had his music always has this really haunting quality and this almost kind of ambient quality to it when you listen to him.
absolutely,
It is very much just sort of that kind of late night, quiet, introspective kind of love songs
yeah,
so just introspective songs that are just really just lovely to listen to.
definitely, yeah, it's a mood basically.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
but I first heard about this film, believe it or not, the year it came out, and it's been on my list ever since. So
Yeah.
there used to be this program, Film 98, Film 2000. Every year it had a different the year of the. So this would be Film 26 this year. If it was, I don't know if it's still on, but it was on the BBC and they had this chap Barry Norman, who was a bit of a legend. He
Yes.
actually appears in a sketch, Monty Python sketch from the 70s. But he was still going in the sort of late 80s when I was at school. And I remember watching the film 88, it must have been. And he talked about this film and said it was really, really good. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, that sounds great. I'd really like to watch that. And it's sort of been somewhere way, way back in the back of my head. And then about maybe 5 or 10 years ago, a friend said, "Oh, went to see this film, Let's Get Lost, all about Chet Baker. It's been re-released at the cinemas." I thought, "Oh, wow, great! I've been meaning to see that for 30 years." So here we are. Now I thought, brilliant! We've got a podcast. We can choose anything we want. I can choose that film I've been meaning to
That's
watch
right.
in '88. And so that's where it came. That's why I was sort of interested in it. I think I must have seen a sort of trailer, or I must have seen sort of clips in the thing, and it just looked pretty interesting as well. The sort of black and white, because it's all in.
So sorry, when was this reissue in the cinema? Was
I
this
think it was 2016, 2014, 2018. I'm not sure. Around sometime in sort of in the 2010s, at some
okay?
stage, I believe.
Well,
Uh,
2018 would make sense because that would have been an anniversary year. So that might have
yes, maybe
that sounds like.
that would really make sense. Yeah, maybe that's what it was.
And
Uh,
did you go see it
no, I
then?
didn't. I didn't know, but this friend of mine did did go. And say if it was been 2018, we'd have had sort of children by then, so it made it all much more difficult. And especially it wasn't. It was only you had to go to London to watch it, so it would have been just more complicated. So yeah, I never got to see it, but now I have, and I'm really glad. And it's a really good film. And yeah, what a story! What a story! And what a sort of, I mean, you could tell as Bruce Weber's, being a photographer, he has an eye for a beautiful image
Yeah,
because there's just beautiful picture after beautiful picture. And, Chet Baker, when he was young, he was incredibly handsome, wasn't he?
mm, yeah.
Um,
He was
uh,
quite famously like a real heartthrob.
Yeah.
of the period, wasn't he? Like he was just everyone was just totally in love with the guy, and he was just has this sort of like kind of perfect chiseled sort of
Completely.
face
Yeah.
and stuff, and he and along with that silky voice and
Yeah.
that incredible talented sort of trumpet playing, that he just absolutely was like this sort of pinnacle of sort of popular sort
Mm.
of culture at the time,
Yeah.
and just extraordinary. But the film then goes on to well, it kind of takes an interesting way of telling the story, doesn't it? Because there's a lot of uh, his own recollections and his own version of events, but
Yeah.
then the film cuts between people in his life
Yeah.
that along the way that he's spent time with or had relationships with or had sort of professional relationships with, and how he's left this kind of trail carnage behind him.
Carnage.
But what's extraordinary is that every one of those people, more or less, except for maybe one or two of the ladies, his
Yeah.
former sort of, all still seem to love him to bits, despite the
Yes.
fact that he's let them all down, and he's had a very troubled life and constantly been having financial problems and drug related problems and
Yeah.
alcohol related problems. And although they never really show it, and this is one of the big contrasts I've found between the two films, because in a lot of ways it sounds like the the two Bakers have quite similar personalities, but
Yeah.
the difference is how it manifests itself.
Yeah.
And you don't really see Chet Baker's kind of, you don't see a lot of aggression.
No.
The way his personality comes across in the movie is very much the same way that his music comes across, is very quiet and
Yeah.
introspective and gentle, and he just has this way about him that you just kind of feel like, oh, you just want to give the guy a hug because he
Yeah.
just, he seems a bit sad and melancholy, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the vibe that you get from the whole film and from
Yeah.
him, which is quite, but in the sort of conversations with some of the people in his life, there seems to be another side of him that we never really get to see in the film.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is definitely true. And yeah, I sort of wrote down, there's his truth, and then there's then the truth. So never
Yes.
really sure what's what. And
Yeah.
I like that. It's sort of fairly, yeah, it's sort of unclear what exactly. Like there's one example, because he's famously basically doesn't have any teeth. They've all been knocked out. And he says, "Oh yeah," he tells his story of why this happened. It was in the late '60s, late 1968, and it was just he got into he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and these people knocked his teeth out.
Yeah, he got set upon and he got beat up, and that's how his teeth got damaged. And that
Exactly.
was his story.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
then one of his wives said, "Oh no, no," or girlfriend rather said, "No, no, no. This is a targeted attack because he'd sort of ripped somebody off or pissed someone off somehow, annoyed somebody. Sorry,
Mm.
and they said, right, how are we going to really hurt him in a way that because he's a jazz musician, get rid of his teeth. He plays and sings, and it's going to ruin his art." And
Mm.
so that's why they knocked his teeth out. It wasn't just bad luck, and
Mm.
that he got set upon by muggers who happened to knock his teeth out. Oh no, there's a bit more to it than that. And then they showed some film from the late '50s at another time, and he was in this sort of like film from the late '50s. Wait a second, he opened his mouth. He was missing a few teeth. So you know,
Well,
um,
yeah. So yeah, you're true. You're right in that the fact that you never really get to know, and the truths are elusive in this film,
exactly.
and the film has like that kind of enigmatic texture to it, where it
Yes.
sort of you get different sides of the story, and
Yeah.
certainly the lady who relates her version of events that it's just pure speculation on her part because it doesn't sound like she was a part
Around.
of his life at the
No,
time.
I don't think no.
And so she's just making assumptions. And it's also very clear that she has a lot of personal sort of like animosity towards him,
Yeah,
or I mean, I don't know if animosity is the right word because again, just like everyone else, she sounds like she's still totally madly in love with the guy.
yeah,
But she's been obviously quite hurt and has a lot of bitter sort of feelings about a lot of things about their relationship and about
mm,
him and about the way she's been treated. And that kind of comes out in the way that she relates these things. So she doesn't seem like an entirely reliable witness
no,
to things either.
no, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. One of the stories is the main. I guess this main thing is the addiction and how much of it is sort of him and how much of it is his addiction, which he has this sort of he's in the vice-like grip of this heroin addiction that
Mm.
starts at one stage. So somebody gave him heroin in the late 50s, and then somebody else said, "Oh no, he was been taking heroin since the early 50s." So we don't
Mm.
really know. That's another thing. But yeah, how much of his sort of bad behavior is sort of down to his habit, and how much of it is just him being flaky. I'm not sure. I mean, it's just a completely academic and ridiculous question because that's one of the
I don't
same.
know. I don't know because I mean, there must be something about the guy that because it was quite clear, as I said, that everybody just loves him to
Yeah,
bits. And even when they've been really let down by him and everything, there's this certain aspect of the way they talk about him that they just love the guy and they just you know like I say you just want to sort of go and give the guy a hug and just sort
yeah,
of and even in the film in this later stage, I mean, here's a man who's quite clearly physically frail and
yeah,
very worn, and you talk about the teeth and everything, yet he's still got a couple of very young attractive women on his arms hanging around with him, and
yeah,
it's implied that at least one of them is in a relationship with him.
yeah,
And he so there's just something about him that he just seems to have an allure and a charisma and something that just appeals to people. And they just and what one lady even says that he just has this thing that just automatically makes you feel sorry for him
yeah,
and makes you feel like you want to take care of him.
yeah, yeah,
And you kind of get that sense even just during the interviews and discussing things, when he's discussing things, you kind of feel like you just feel this real sense of melancholy and sort of
yeah,
sadness and sort of you feel really sorry for the guy.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you do feel sorry for the people he's come into contact with, like his
Mm,
wives and girlfriends, especially he's sort of basically he has children and there's and his poor mum. At one
mm,
stage, they interview his mum, who seems not unexpected. She doesn't seem like the mum of a sort of wild jazz cat. Um,
no.
she and there's one bit the interviewer asks her, well, how about his sort of issues, or do you feel proud of him, or something like that? And she said, I'd rather not answer that. It's just a little bit
Mm,
sad. And his children also, because one of his things, this is something that he shares with the other Mr. Baker, is just sort of disappearing, just sort of right, is like it's time to go, and off he goes. And that happened with his sort of even with his family and his children. So they were like, "Oh, Dad's gone. He's just sort of disappeared. Well, where I don't know." And that was
mm,
rather sort of sad. The impact on his loved ones and children, especially, I suppose. Well,
mm,
his wives, but yeah. And there's one really beautiful scene where his children are all sitting there in a row, and his ex-wife and I think maybe his mum, they're all listening to his music, and it's just there's no speaking, just they're just sort of transfixed, and that's the sort of thing because he can, he is somebody who's sort of broken their heart, but at the same time they know that he's produced this art that is sort of so pure and
Yeah, and
sort of
just transcends all that. It
exactly.
is almost like when you hear sometimes some of these kind of artists who just have such natural gifts and it all just comes out so
Yeah,
naturally, it is almost like something else is speaking through them.
yeah,
And it's like when you listen to him sing sometimes, especially on some of those records from the 50s and 60s that I've listened to, it just does. It's like this ethereal, kind of magical sort of sound
yeah,
that's coming out of this person that you just think, it's like there's something else going on here. And they
yeah,
all say, like, there's one guy who talks about just how easy it all came to him.
yes,
Is that he said, "Oh, I really had to practice lots and I had to really work hard to be able to play that good and at that level and, with women and all that kind of stuff." But with Chet Baker, it just came naturally and he
yeah,
didn't have to work at it at all. He could just sort of almost kind of show up and just phone it in. Yet it was just amazing and
yeah,
perfect. And there's a little bit of like that about Ginger Baker as well, isn't there?
very
Because
much. Both,
there just seems to be this incredible natural thing that just comes out of them
yeah,
without even trying,
not
and
even
it's
sure if
just
they had lessons.
extraordinary.
Either of them, they didn't mention going to sort of music lessons or anything. They just sort of listened to the
Yeah,
radio or something, and they just sort of
yeah,
did it. It's like, oh, that's how
yeah,
you.
yeah,
And
exactly.
they're like, oh, right, okay,
It's just
amazing.
that natural ear. Like his mom said that he was 9 years old and he would just listen to these records. And
Yeah,
then as soon as his dad bought him a trumpet, he was off. He just
yeah,
was doing it just like that. And it's just like, and you just like didn't even have to, it was like it was just in him already and it just comes pouring out. And it's
yeah,
just extraordinary that there are people like that who just seem to be, sort of have just a natural gift,
really,
and it's quite extraordinary. But then I guess what comes with that is all with the substance abuse and everything is just that constant, pressure of having to do it. And with
mm,
addiction, it's like everything has to be at a high level, including their senses and
yeah,
their lifestyle and everything. Just everything about them has to be at this incredible high level and
yeah,
about the toll that ultimately takes, which is quite extraordinary.
yeah. This extraordinary level of intensity in the music, and I guess that's it. It is just very much in his life as well, and he
Yeah.
struggled sort of um, to live life at an ordinary level. He just can't. He just needs that sort of screaming intensity at all times. Uh,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, the adrenaline and the just the stimulation, the intellectual
mm,
and sort of physical stimulation just has to be sort of constant and it has to they try and maintain that all the time.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I guess one thing about this film, which you don't get in Beware of Mr. Baker, they sort of will get to why they think he might have had this addiction, but in Let's Get Lost, they don't really say there was anything in his past
mm,
that might have sort of led to it. Whereas Ginger Baker does have this sort of event in its past that's obviously sort of formative. Whereas Chet Baker, I don't know, he doesn't seem to have had anything like that. Not that they mention.
yeah. Well,
It's just
that is one of the thing about the film, isn't it, that it doesn't, because that is one thing. I wouldn't necessarily call this a criticism, but just like an observation more
yes,
about the fact that the film, I didn't necessarily come away with it with that real sort of deep understanding of the person. It
no,
was more just like the film has that more of a sort of an abstract kind of quality to it of just like it's like a portrait, a snapshot, but
exactly,
it's not necessarily really, digs in at that deep level. It's just
yeah,
sort of more impressionistic.
yeah,
Because you mentioned about because the director was a photographer, and the film does have just like loads of beautiful imagery. It's shot in black and white, and it just has it's beautiful. It's just beautiful to look at. Many of the images and the way that he chooses to frame people when he's speaking to them and stuff, like it's a real nice piece of filmmaking as well, as being just, whereas the Ginger Baker documentary is more of a conventional film
Yeah,
interview sort of documentary film with talking heads and
exactly.
historical clips. And
Yeah.
you get some of that in this film as well, but it's all done in a much more kind of abstract and sort of interesting way. So
Mm.
it works as a piece of filmmaking as well, just an interesting visual and um, intellectual piece of filmmaking that sort of leaves things a little bit more open and a little less
Mm.
sort of tidy, and
Yeah.
which which is nice in one sense, but also it did leave me a little bit more about wanting to know more about, like you say, about like where exactly did this guy come from and what was it that really inspired him, because you
Yeah.
do really get the impression like it was almost like God just came down and pointed his finger at him and said, make this man a genius. And then and then it was like off he went, you know
Yeah.
but really amazing. And it really struck me too about 'cause the other film touches on this a bit as well, about the
Yeah.
finances of these chaps,
Yeah.
because Chet Baker was a huge star. And one of the guys in the film talks about that, about the fact that, because something that always bothers me, that there was a guy in this film that mentions it, about the fact that when you talk about a certain kind of historical period in popular music,
Yeah.
people always sort of make the mistake, and when they're going back and making uh, period piece films, or
Yeah.
when you listen to sort of nostalgic radio stations and stuff,
Right.
they always tend to emphasize kind of the hits. They always kind of go back and look at the
Mm.
charts and the number, the top 20 hits.
Yeah.
But that isn't always really a reflection of the reality about what people were really listening to, kind
No.
of what the cool stuff was, what the sort of the hip stuff was that
Yeah.
people were actually buying and listening to at home, rather than what was a hit on the radio and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a guy who mentions about that he says in the 50s, everyone was talking about, rock and roll and talking about this, that, and the other thing. But everyone I knew had jazz records,
Yeah.
and they had Chet Baker records, and they had, Dizzy
Yeah.
Gillespie and Miles Davis and all those guys
Yeah.
who were kind of the cool, hip things that people were actually listening to and were into.
Yeah.
And the guy mentions that. And Chet Baker was a major, major popular star of the day.
Mm.
Yet only just sort of 20 years later, there's all this story that's reflected in the film about the fact that he had some real financial hardships and difficulties.
Yeah.
And you just kind of think, here's somebody who probably sold hundreds of thousands of albums every year and
Yeah.
had loads and loads of records, because I've got loads of his records in my
Yeah.
collection. And he said something at one point that he recorded over 900 songs
Wow.
during his career. And you just think, with all that work that he did and the popularity of his recordings,
Mm.
why was he broke? And the same with Ginger Baker. Like, he was, involved in some real huge popular super groups.
Yeah.
Yet, toward the period that the film covers talks about the fact that he's broke. He's got
Yeah.
no money. And you
Yeah.
think, yes, okay, you can explain some of that away from making bad decisions and the addiction and the spending
Yeah.
money left, right, and center, and the lifestyle. But you also have to question, why weren't these guys getting the proceeds from all these records that they made?
Mm. Yeah.
They should be
Well,
getting royalty checks in the mail every few months or whatever.
they should be. Yeah. I wonder if they sold the rights or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah. Well. Yeah. It's a very good point, because he didn't live a very um, glamorous life after the 50s, I suppose. Did he? He didn't. Didn't sound like.
No. And he even said at one point he was working at a gas station and people didn't even know who he was.
Yeah,
He was there wearing overalls and covered in grease and putting petrol in people's car.
yeah,
And sort of like people, he asked him, he said, "Do people recognize you and know who you were?" And he was
yeah,
like, "No, no, people didn't know who I was. I was just working at the gas station." And it's extraordinary that you think, who made all the money from these records? Because you
yeah.
hear those stories a lot, especially about jazz musicians, but also, more sort of rock and popular uh, artists who always claim that the record companies and the producers and stuff just rip them off all the time,
Mm,
and they just never got, or the contracts that they signed were really disadvantageous to them, so
yeah.
that they never really got a lot of the proceeds from their own work. It was always somebody else who was making all the money from
Mm,
it, the promoters and the producers and so I think that's an interesting sort of thing to pull out of it as well, about how a
definitely.
lot of these people who were incredibly popular and successful on the one hand didn't really reap the benefits from the work that they did.
No, no. Yeah, there's a story about Chet Baker. The Manchester poet John Cooper Clarke, and so he used to go out with Nico, formerly of the Velvet Underground, and they had a mutual love of heroin as well, and they happened to be in uh, Amsterdam, and then trying to get there, score some heroin. And basically, they met this guy. I'm not sure if they bought it off him or not. But anyway, it was only later they said he realized that was Chet Baker trying to trying to. So he ended basically. He was, as well. He was sort of selling drugs on the street in Amsterdam. Can you imagine? Yeah, it's, a long way to fall. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
what a sort
Well,
and
it's a bit of a sad story, and he came to a bit of a sticky end as well. Like at one point, I guess he just fell out of his hotel window, and
yeah,
he was found on the street dead. And it was only like about a year or so after this film was
even
like
less
the
time I think because by the time the film was released, he'd already died. Uh,
yeah.
yeah,
So
not
it just adds an extra layer of sort of melancholy to the film, really, because that this. But I mean, it's quite valuable for that too, because it documents the last year of this extraordinary man's life,
yeah,
and here you can hear his thoughts and his see what was happening with him just before the end, and I think that makes it all the more sort of fascinating and valuable, I think, as a piece of film.
definitely. One of the things I'd say is that you could also see who he's hanging out with because one of briefly you can see Flea of the Red Hot Chili Peppers is in the film
Yeah,
because he's sort of somehow hanging out with him, and also Chris Isaac,
mm,
he had a sort of hit in the early '90s. He's
mm,
in the film briefly as well. So all these sort of young people are sort of drawn to him to sort of gain knowledge from his vast experience as well, which is quite nice.
yeah. I mean, it's just a really, really good film, and I'm glad I've finally seen it because, like you, I kind of vaguely remember when it came out, and
Right.
it was one of those things that I just never got around to seeing. And Yeah, I'm really pleased that I got a chance to see it,
Good.
and I certainly will be going back and listening to some more Chet Baker records because
Brilliant. Definitely.
it just reminds you he's always been one of those people who's just been on the periphery for me.
Right.
But and then I kind of think when I see this film, it kind of makes me just think that yeah, I should be paying more attention to him.
One of the things for me is this his addiction. That was what a sad thing that was. That was one of my abiding sort of thoughts through this. And yeah, but yeah, really good film, and I'm glad I finally got to see it. I'm glad you enjoyed it too.
Yes, at last, it only took you 40 years.
My goodness.
Better late than never, I would say. And I would say that to people out there as well, that, it's not too late. Let's sit down and watch this film. It's available right now as of recording. We're recording this in April of 2026. And right now, Let's Get Lost is available as part of your Amazon Prime subscription. So
It
you
is.
can go and check that out. And if it's any other time, you might just go to our Letterbox profile and you can check out the listing for Let's Get Lost, and it will tell you in your territory where you can access the film. And it's definitely worth a look. A really, really interesting, kind of melancholy exploration of a really interesting personality. So
Definitely.
um, get out there, folks, and watch it.
Yep.
So we're going to carry on in a moment. First we're going to have a little intermission, have a break, and give Jonathan a chance to go and quickly stuff a couple cucumber sandwiches down his throat, so he has a fix that'll keep him focused for the second half of the show,
Yeah.
and then we're going to talk about the second half of our Baker. What were we going to call it, Jonathan? Baker breakdown, I think, was what we're going to call the episode, and we'll come back and talk about our second feature in our double bill. It's called "Beware of Mr. Baker."
Mm.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back in just a moment. So listen intently because we won't be long.
Stupid cop. All I wanted to do was watch my movie. Now my life's become more difficult than ever.
No, sir! Do not lose hope. Get yourself a film swap mug.
Who are you? How did you get in my house?
This is no ordinary mug. It's a quiet sweep of ceramic intention. Light slides along its curves, as if dancing on the magic shadows of a projector screen. The body doesn't just hold the liquid, it cradles it, deliberate, balanced, reassuring in the hand. The handle flows in a perfect arc, sculpted for fingers, designed for moments. The perfect beverage companion for those compelling movie marathons. Clinical surveys found that beverages sipped from this cup are 33% more refreshing. Independent taste labs reported a 27% improvement in aroma retention. Participants described the handle as remarkably intuitive and 42% faster. With a likeness of David and Jonathan etched exquisitely on a gleaming surface, companionship rises to 51%. They turn gently into view with every lift, accompanying each pause, each sip. Fondly reliving those favorite podcast moments with every drop of fluid that passes these lips. Because with this mug, they're not just part of the design, they're there with you every time you lift it. Celebrate cinema and yourself. Get your Film Swap mug today. For more details, go to filmswap.uk.
Thanks for the mug. Now can you please get out of my house?
And we're back. Welcome back, listeners, and welcome back, Jonathan,
Hi.
to our Baker double feature, Baker breakdown double feature. Tonight we're talking about two documentaries about quite seminal 20th century icons of popular music and turbulent life and turbulent lifestyles. And they're two very kind of different films and different personalities in a way, but there's also a lot of quite extraordinary similarities between them as well, which make these two films quite an interesting pairing indeed. So I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed co-host to introduce our second feature, which is the 2012 documentary by a man named Jay Bulger, and it is called Beware of Mr. Baker.
Yes. Beware of Mr. Baker came out in 2012, and which was, I think, 6 years before Ginger Baker died. And so not quite as close as the first film, but not too far from the end of its life. And it looks at Ginger Baker, who, if you didn't know, is a rock and jazz drummer. So he really saw himself as a jazz drummer, but he sort of got his fame playing for various sort of rock bands, I guess. He is most famous, I guess, for being in Cream with Eric Clapton for sort of 2 years as a supergroup. He also played in another band, Blind Faith, with Stevie Winwood and Eric Clapton as well. And he had his own band, Ginger Baker's Air Force. And then he went to Africa and lived there for about 6 or 7 years and played with Fela Kuti, the great Afrobeat pioneer. Played with loads of different people and extraordinary talented drummer. And I mean, I guess the best known drummers, sort of rock drummers, are Keith Moon and John Bonham of Led Zepp. But according to this documentary, he's much better than either of them. So I'm not sure if that's true.
I think there's certainly a lot of evidence in the film that makes pretty strongly makes that case that he was quite an extraordinary musician, quite
He
a
was
talented guy.
but basically, all of each forelimb was doing something completely different. His eyes were, I mean, there's numerous pictures of his eyes in this film.
Yeah. Just wild, crazy eyes in those pictures all the time.
Wild. I mean, it's funny because my notes for the first film, its sort of first word is ruination. So Chet Baker's sort of ruination, and his talks about his ethereal music and his ethereal style. This one, the first word, aggressive.
Yeah.
So the Baker temper. And basically, yeah, these are the sort of two different vibes. You know, Chet's this sort of super chilled guy, and Ginger is this sort of wild madman who's always getting into arguments and fights and just extraordinary.
Well, that was one thing I was going to say because I kind of alluded to it in the first half of the show when we were talking about Chet Baker. But the two films, there is the hint and the suggestion in Let's Get Lost that Chet Baker had that side of his personality, someone who was a drug addict and had sort of, maybe some mental health problems and stuff. And you get hints from some of the observations of the people talking about him in the film that maybe he did have a bit of a temper and maybe he did have sort of that side to him that was a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
But you never see any of it in the film. And you certainly don't get that, you don't see that side of him. And you almost kind of can't even believe that he would have that side to him in the way that Chet Baker is presented in that film.
Yes.
But in this film, this man is just absolutely seems like someone who might be, and again, obviously I didn't know the guy, and but he seems like someone who could be quite
difficult
to get along with.
Yeah, I'll say
someone who was, very combative, very, spoke his mind quite freely, was very sort of aggressive, and he just seems like someone who might be difficult to get on with. That's just the impression he gives.
I mean, he would be pleased with that description, I think. He would have no problem with that. He's a sort of, I guess, a plain speaking guy, and
to a fault. Because there's one thing about, because I like a plain speaking person. I'm someone who is a plain speaker, and just I'm quite honest and open and just talk. In that way, there's no real artifice with me.
Yeah.
But this guy, takes it to that level where sort of things that most people might sort of just think in their head, but
Yeah,
not actually say out loud
yeah,
because of how it might be construed or
yeah.
the impact or the effect it would have on the people around them. This guy doesn't have that filter,
No, he
does
doesn't.
he?
Yeah,
He lets it all out all the time,
yeah, yeah.
unapologetically,
Exactly.
and is he seemed like he was quite an extraordinary guy to be around.
Definitely, definitely. He
Yeah,
he sort of liked to scrap, basically. Uh, yeah,
yeah.
is but he does have a sense of humor. He is, he's likable in the film, but you sort of think likable in a film. I'm not sure if I'd want to, hang out with him for
Well,
too long. But
you think like because when you see this side of someone and the way he's represented in this film, because it's an interesting parallel too about the differences in the approach of the filmmakers, isn't it?
yes,
Because the man who made Let's Get Lost was obviously a bit more sort of protective, wanted to portray Chet Baker in a positive way,
yeah,
and there was a lot of admiration you could tell, right?
yeah,
And that kind of comes out of what people said about him, that he was just that type of person that he made you feel that way about him, like you wanted to sort of look after him, and you felt sorry for him and you wanted to take care of him, and that was kind of his personality and
yeah,
what he brought out of people. But this guy, Ginger Baker, seemed like he brings out that the filmmaker very much was almost antagonistic himself. And one, he was like he was looking for some dirt and looking for some stuff that he could get out of him. And there's a few scenes in it where he tries to sort
yeah,
of goad him almost and sort
yeah.
of get him to, he says, take
Funny.
your glasses off so I can see your eyes. And why don't you
Yes.
tell me what you thought of so and so? And he seems to be kind of like trying to get a rise out of him so it would make some good film,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So there's that difference of style of approach.
Yes.
But I guess to go back to what I was actually going to say was that despite how he's portrayed in the film, I mean, he must have been likable on some level because it's like
Yeah.
he has friends and he never had any trouble with the ladies,
No?
and things like that. So,
Eric
um,
Clapton says he's my best mate or something, doesn't he?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So I think maybe the film is sort of like kind of purposely creating a little bit of that, just showing that side of his temperament and his
yes.
personality.
Yeah.
But there are hints within the film, like certainly when you see him playing in Africa and when you see him in certain sort of live performances and stuff, there's a lot of joy there as well, and a lot of energy and a lot of
Mm.
sort of things about him that you must think that there must have been a more positive side to him in order, because otherwise he just wouldn't have been able to function at all.
No, that's true. That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's doesn't leave out as much of this film.
Mm,
It's a bit more of a it's a bit more conventional than the first
yeah.
one. But in some ways that's good. And because we sort of get a bit more of an idea of the guy. Not only does he have a heroin problem, but every single bit of footage, he's smoking a cigarette. He doesn't just smoking a cigarette. He's got about 2 millimeters left of his cigarette,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just about to light another one. And it's
And a
amazing.
lot of toast as well. He always seems to have some half-eaten toast nearby.
With the cigarette butts in it. Yeah,
Yeah.
he got to
Yeah.
80, amazingly, which
Yeah.
is pretty good considering he did not sort of shirk hard living at all. He did it
No,
with gusto, didn't he?
he
Absolutely.
certainly did. Yeah.
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 And I mean, I guess one of the connections, because he's best known for playing with Cream, a sort of rock band, and also Blind Faith. But he actually, before that, he'd been into jazz, and he started off being a sort of student of Phil Seaman, sort of
Mm.
famous British jazz drummer. and
Yeah, who he credited with getting him into heroin, didn't
he did. He did.
he?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He's like a sort of jazz drummer who's sort of sold out to rock in a way, and that was sort of maybe part of his sort of issue, because he was never really doing the right, or not often doing the thing that he should have been doing, which was playing
Mm,
a jazz band. But it's really interesting part if you're interested in sort of 60s and 70s British music, rock and roll, and all this sort of stuff.
mm.
Got lots of interesting names.
Yeah, and even jazz to a certain
Oh,
degree because they show him playing like those sort of jazz duels or the sort of
yeah,
drum duels that he like. Obviously, it was a promotional gimmick, but he
yeah,
would do these. He would play with Art Blakey in a sort of jazz, sort
yeah.
of drum, sort of uh,
Drum battles.
drum battle. Yeah,
That's what he
sorry,
called them. His
and
drum battles.
yeah, and he did that with a few really famous sort of other drummers, and they'd play these amazing sort of concerts where the two of them would sit down and have these little sort of battles and then end up playing together and stuff.
Yeah,
And, it was some quite extraordinary footage there. And just playing with some absolute legends of music, he
yeah,
played with everybody, didn't he? And it was
yeah,
just amazing. And that's where you see a little bit of his tender side because there's one point in the film where he breaks down crying, saying about how all the people that he most admired as musicians ultimately became good friends of his,
yeah,
and that seemed to really make a lot, mean a lot to him.
yeah,
Whereas his relationship with a lot of his rock contemporaries and some of his bandmates
yeah.
in some of these really famous groups, he didn't seem to really have much time for them and vice versa. They didn't really seem to necessarily, I mean, they obviously all admired each other's talents and things, but they didn't get on personally at all.
No.
And he didn't seem to really maintain friendships with most of them. Only Eric Clapton seemed to be a little bit more charitable towards him. But Eric Clapton always, again, I mean, I don't know the guy, but Eric Clapton always comes across to me as being a little bit more mild mannered, laid back kind of person.
Yeah.
And he seemed to be a little bit more philosophical about Ginger Baker's personality and his sort of
Mm.
working with him and stuff. And he seemed to be a bit more open to sort of saying, I got time for the guy and he was all right.
Yeah.
But he's not someone who I would necessarily choose to hang around with a lot because,
Yes.
you know, because of his sort of,
Addictions, basically. That was one of
he's,
his things, wasn't it? And
yeah,
how I mean, Eric Clapton has a sort of quite grown up approach to his sort of addictions and
mm,
and abstinence, whereas sort of Mr. Baker seems to be very much still in the grip of them. Well, not very much, but yeah, I guess the story is a bit more hopeful than um,
mm,
Chet Baker's story because he has got a bit of a handle on it. He does seem to have given up heroin, whereas Chet Baker never
mm,
really did, um,
yeah,
and sort of made it to his 80 when he died. He made it to
yeah,
his 70s when this film was being made, which is not bad at all considering he definitely. I mean, even if you just count the smoking, it's amazing.
yeah.
That's what.
It is amazing that, yeah, that kind of lifestyle. Because you think about some of what's the name of the guitarist in the Rolling Stones? The one with the really
Keith.
Keith Richards. Oh my God, I couldn't think of his name for the life of me. Um, but like he's the same. Like he's someone like you think about the lifestyle and the,
Yeah,
the fact that he's kind of still going,
yeah,
and you almost think that like all the drug use and everything just sort of kind of mummified them,
yeah,
while they were still alive. So they kind of just were able to just keep going
yeah,
despite the hard living and stuff. So it's
yeah,
quite amazing.
yeah. Well,
And I got a big kick too out of the fact, like, because you see this image of the guy and all the, like you mentioned, the photos and the eyes and the kind of wild behavior and the drone. He's playing the drums. He just looks like he's possessed. and it's
Yes.
just like this extraordinary thing. But then later on in life, he developed this obsession with polo,
Yes. Yeah.
and you see him up on the horse,
Yeah.
with the, sort of, and it's kind of like, again, that's kind of a bit out of left field. It's not something you would expect.
Not just polo, but also Range Rovers.
Yeah,
So he
yeah.
loved a Range Rover, and so he first got to Lagos, where he met Fela Kuti, by driving across the Sahara in a sort of Mark One Range Rover. It was an extraordinary tale. And then he almost became a rally. Did he do a rally, a sort of Range Rover rally at some stage in the
There
desert?
was, yeah, at one point they mentioned that he took part in something, and then he had to, was that when he had to end up fleeing for his life because they were going to arrest him or something? I can't remember the
Yeah,
details of the story, but it's quite a colorful life of adventure. I mean, he had this, he seemed to just have this thing where even when things were going well or going badly or going well,
yeah,
he just seemed to, after a couple of years, kind of get restless and pick up and just move on and
yes,
just sort of like, and go to the most seemingly random places.
yeah,
Because to be a successful, popular musician in the rock world in the 70s,
yeah,
and then just to pick up and just say, I'm moving to Africa,
yeah, yeah,
and he just sort of, and then he just took off and disappeared and went to Africa. And it's just
yes,
sort of like, you just think, yeah, probably not a great career move,
no,
but it was obviously just that restless spirit in him that just kind of is like he's sort of never really satisfied, and he was always out searching for, that, next frontier kind of thing.
yeah. One of the things about him, it seems to be that yeah, he does never quite fits in because, well, partly because he's always moving off, because he's like, he never sees himself as a rock drummer, even though, because he thinks he's a jazz drummer, so that's why he never
Mm.
fits in. And then wherever he goes, he sort of doesn't quite fit in, and he's off again. And then then his other hobby is polo, playing polo. But he's never really. I mean, he obviously loves polo, and he must be reasonable at it. But
Mm.
I guess he's not the classic polo type. He's not
No,
Ralph Lauren, is he?
no, certainly not. And it's sort of, yeah, the back, like, as polo's kind of like a kind of, rich people's kind of thing, isn't it? Like going
Yeah,
and knocking a ball around with a stick, and you just he doesn't come across as someone who you would think would gravitate towards that, but
no,
for some reason he just got it in his blood, and there's stories about him buying loads of expensive horses and then having them
yeah,
shipped all over the world, and
yeah,
um, you know, uh, and these preoccupations seem to come at the expense of his family and his friends and things.
yes,
There's loads of stories. I mean, it was heartbreaking, the story of his son, who was
yeah,
also a drummer, and there
yeah,
was these lovely sort of clips of him playing with his son. Like there was a certain point where they were living together or working together, and they would play these concerts together, and you can just see the joy in them, that father and son
yeah,
beside each other looking at each other while they're playing, big smiles, all so happy. And then he relates a story about how one day he just turned around and said, I'm leaving and you're no good, and you're never going to be a good musician, and you're a bit crap and a bit rubbish, and I'm off, see you later. And he just
yeah,
left.
yeah.
And you just think, God, man, that's just really harsh.
Well, his son, one at one stage, his son said, "My dad shouldn't have had a family." That's sort of quite a
Mm,
sort of harsh verdict, really, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
I guess that's one thing that both these films left me thinking, that these two guys, you know, they they left this amazing art. They created this amazing art, but their family lives were, well, not great.
Feel loads of people all just sort of left
Mm.
left behind. and left to fend for themselves when he just decides to pick up and take off. And they do delve a bit, like as we talked about in the first half of the show, about the fact that there's a little bit more of an understanding, although I suppose it's more of just a sort of a superficial background about his father leaving for the war and not
Yes.
coming back, to explain his personality, because obviously a lot more goes into it than just one particular event that
Yeah.
that kind of shapes a person. But it's also very interesting, and you can understand that a lot of the his generation would have
Yeah.
had that experience. A lot of um,
Yeah.
fathers never came back from fighting,
Yeah.
fighting in the war,
Yeah.
and that story would have been repeated loads of times for that generation that grew up
Yep.
with having, maybe they were just children during the war, but the impact on their psychology, just the whole generation,
Mm.
with having bombs dropped on them and having to
Yeah.
move around and losing family members and losing fathers and brothers and things,
Yeah.
and how that would have shaped their sort of outlook and their sort of approach to life.
Roger Waters is a famous example of someone who's lost his dad
Yeah.
in the war as well, hasn't he?
Yeah,
Uh,
and it had a profound impact on his sort of music and his art, didn't it?
yeah.
Because he obviously, that was a sort of a big feature in his background, about losing that part of his life so early on
Yeah.
and in such a sudden way.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's all just fascinating stuff, and I love those animations in the film as well. Those
Yes.
sort of, like, they use a few times, they cut away to these sort of quite cool little animations, which is again, quite maybe in more contemporary documentaries you see that kind of thing quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that's kind of almost become a bit of a trend in
Yes.
sort of documentaries that you see. But I did like them. I think they were quite kind of cool and added to the effect of the you know
And they weren't they
the,
weren't too literal. They were quite sort of poetic.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, sort of more metaphoric and quite amazing. Like, again, showing the impact of the different musics that he heard. Because it's true, like you mentioned, someone like John Bonham, and apologies in advance if there's Led Zeppelin fans listening out there, but if you listen to someone like John Bonham, and he's just sort of like thumping some tin cans. That's why his drumming sounds like that, just sort of boop,
yeah.
boop, 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 and never really did much for me. But when you listen to Ginger Baker, and when you see in this film some of the clips of him playing, you can see he's just on a completely whole different level in terms of the complexity and he just obviously was just of a quite a high caliber musicianship.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to, like we were talking about with Chet Baker, is about how it just all seemed to just come so natural to him, just sort of just,
That's it.
without even much effort. He just seemed to have this incredible timing and this incredible energy and this sort of, just quite, so there's some quite amazing footage of him playing.
Yeah.
And I wasn't that familiar with that Air Force band of
No, I
his.
don't know them either. I'm going to look them up.
No, but I think after seeing this film, I'd actually like to investigate a little bit of that, because those sound like they might be something that I'd be interested in listening to see what they're like, because you only get a little snip of it in the film, but it was
Yep.
enough to make me go, oh, I might want to go and check some of those records out, see what they're
Definitely.
like. They look kind of cool.
Definitely.
I don't know how commercially successful they were, because I wasn't familiar with them at all. So,
But it sounded
yeah,
more like they were sort of more of a live band than a sort of studio band.
yeah,
So with about sort of 30 people on the stage.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, he did. Ginger Baker seems like the sort of the drummer's drummer,
Mm,
and it's someone that sort of musicians, because they did have a lot of musicians there in the thing, all sort of praising him, and
mm,
that made me think, yeah, that's interesting. They could they knew his worth, even if he didn't really quite break through into sort of the popular uh, awareness of this extraordinary talent. I mean, I guess he did, but not in the same way. Um,
Mm,
Maybe Chet Baker. So they had sort of experts vouching for him instead a bit more, which was good. And
mm,
you know, so yeah, his rather chaotic sort of private life, and then it's interesting at the end. Flea, who funnily enough is in Let's Get Lost briefly, appears as a talking head in Beware
mm.
of Mr. Baker, doesn't he? And he
Yeah,
said, I cannot question anyone with results that perfect.
yeah.
And I thought that was quite a good, and that is almost the similar sort of feeling that you get in that clip in Let's Get Lost, where the family are all sitting there listening to this music, Chet Baker's music, thinking, yeah, he's a bastard, but he just produces this amazing stuff.
Mm,
I thought it was Flea said, I cannot question anyone with results that perfect. Actually, it was Johnny Rotten. The other thing that I was quite touched by is his love of horses. And his sort of polo is like so unlikely and weird. How did he get into well, we know how he got into polo. Somebody just suggested it and he thought, oh, okay, I'll do it.
mm,
It's just a random thing. And, horses do have a sort of therapeutic quality, I think. And
mm,
they seemed, maybe they were one of the things that helped him sort of kick his habit and gave him that sort of purpose beyond that basically made him let him reach 80, whereas Chet didn't, died at 58. So I thought that was quite a nice aspect of it.
yeah. Well, I think animals do have a very therapeutic quality, don't they? I mean, I know, like, I mean, we have a cat here at our house, but
Yeah,
she's a great companion to me just because she doesn't speak.
yeah,
She
yeah,
just very quietly comes and just sits beside me, and we'll have a cuddle, and she doesn't talk.
yeah,
And as long as I feed her every day and stuff, she's quite there's a sort of real therapeutic quality to animals, having animals around. And I
definitely.
can understand because I think horses are extraordinary animals as well. I don't think I'd want to keep one for a pet myself, but I can certainly understand the appeal
Yeah,
for of having them if you can.
yeah,
Um, and I live in Surrey, so of course there's lots of horses around here.
yeah, definitely, definitely.
but um, but what struck me too is that really I thought it was quite a sad moment. The bit when he at one point he was in Los Angeles and he actually had to put an ad in the paper
Yeah.
to try and get some work. And you just think someone who is at such a high level of success early in his career. And
Mm,
then there was a moment where he actually put a sort of a classified ad in a musician's magazine, sort of saying, "Hey, I'm Ginger Baker. I used to be famous in a big band, and
yeah,
does anyone want to come and play with me?" sort of thing. And I
yeah,
thought that quite affected me because I thought that's quite that in terms of someone's pride,
yes.
that must have been a sort of quite a bitter pill to swallow.
Well, there was one album that he made, like a sort of jazz uh, album when he was still in America in New York, and he played. He had a sort of, was it quartet or a trio,
Yeah.
and that was almost like his sort of musical homecoming. Gone back to
Mm,
his roots of being a sort of jazz drummer, and I
mm,
found that very affecting. But then again, you think, oh, that's nice. Perhaps he could do more of that. Carry on doing that in sort of not exactly obscurity, but you know, just getting by doing something he really loves. But no, then
mm,
off he went again, back off to South Africa, and he sort of, yeah, he could never really sit still. That was the strange
mm.
thing about him. Yeah,
Yeah,
what?
and I don't know, maybe just like there is a little element of sort of self-destructive behavior there, just sort of like when things are going well and something seems to be sort of on the right track, there is that sort of side of some people, isn't there, that just goes, I gotta wreck this, and this is no good. I gotta get out of this because things are going okay. Things are
Yeah.
going well.
Yeah.
So I'm off.
Yep.
It's like sort of self sabotage, but
Yeah.
yeah, a lot to dig into in this movie.
Mm.
And I was saying to you before we started the recording tonight that because the theme of this show was something that you proposed, and
Yeah.
I thought it was a really interesting idea, and but this is a film that I probably never would have watched
Right.
if it weren't for the fact that you proposed this and said, "Oh, we should look at these films," because um, Ginger Baker is someone probably even less so than Chet Baker, who was someone who's really on my radar as someone who's in my sort of field of interest in terms of music.
Yep.
He's like obviously I know of him,
Yep.
and obviously I'm familiar with Cream and some of the stuff that he's done, but
Yep.
it's not something that preoccupies me. I'm not like a big huge sort of Cream fan or Eric Clapton fan or anything like that. Like I
Yep.
like some of the music that they've done, and I enjoy it when I hear it, but I'm not like a big fan.
Right.
So watching a film about Ginger Baker was probably not something that would have been really on my radar or
Yep.
something that would have piqued my interest necessarily. So I'm really glad I saw this film because I it was really engaging and interesting and
Mm.
entertaining film.
Yep.
And I feel like I've learned a little bit more about this, someone who was very much on the periphery of my sort of interest in music.
Yep.
And I've suddenly sort of kind of found out about this guy, and he's a really interesting character.
Mm.
And as I said, I certainly want to go and investigate those Air Force records that he made because I
Yep.
think they sound like they might be something that I might enjoy and I might find interesting, even just to dip into it once, just to
Yep.
see what it's like.
Yep.
So I'm really glad I saw this film. So thank you, Jonathan, for proposing this because
Good.
I really enjoyed this and I thought it was really interesting.
Brilliant.
And I would definitely recommend this to people if you want to see a really interesting character study about this. As I said, it's quite a seminal figure in the rock sort of history of popular rock music of the sort
Definitely.
of 60s and 70s. He's quite an important figure,
Yep.
and so definitely this film is worth checking out.
Yep. Yep. Definitely. I completely agree. Yeah, because I hadn't seen it. Seen the reviews of it, and then I thought, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. And then when and somehow the two Bakers just popped into my head.
Yeah.
Baker versus Baker. That sounds fun.
Well, yeah. The names, the similarity in the names is kind of the hook, but the reality is these films do go together really well. They're quite interesting as a double feature,
Definitely.
as a two films that explore these two really gifted musicians who had turbulent, sad aspects to their lives, and there's a lot of connective tissue between these two films that make them quite interesting,
Yep.
and the differences between them as well, because the different approach in the way that they approach their stories and the
Yep.
differences in the temperament of the two characters and all these things that sort of make them really fit together as two interesting films, I think. So what do you say we do it again in a few weeks, Jono? We'll sit down and talk about a couple more interesting films.
Sounds excellent. Brilliant. I look forward to that.
Well, folks, I want to thank you for listening in today. And we hope you enjoy these films when you check them out. And we hope you enjoyed the conversation. And we will be back again in a few weeks. I wanted to give a quick shout out to our friend of the show, and who's been on a couple times, George Katsudez, who you'll notice our fun little video that we did during the intermission. My son Logan, who also pitched in for that. And be sure to follow us or like us and share and all that kind of social media stuff.
Yep.
And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Till then, take care, and all the best.
All the best.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. Binge-worthy and better with time, our past episodes are packed with deep dives, hot takes and fascinating themes. Whether you're a long-time listener or just jumping in, there's a topic and a classic film to suit any taste. Explore the Film Swap back catalogue today. Learn more at filmswap.uk.
Tinsel and spun candy and thrills.
Oh, the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.